Redditors who went out for cigarettes and never came back. Why did you leave? Where did you go? What is life like for you now? Serious. Just failed out of college. Moved back in with my dad. Things weren't going real well between us. I was depressed and not really going anywhere. I was angry at my dad because he came down on me so hard, but I was mostly angry at myself, and his attitude toward me just kind of compounded it all. Anyway, one day, after being out at a friend's house and hanging out all over the city for a couple days, I finally came home, and things around my house were just tense, and I felt like nothing, and like I would never get out from under this weight. So I just started packing some stuff. As I was leaving, I remember I was coming out of my room with a bag. This wasn't unusual, because I would often take a bag with me when I'd be gone to a friend's house, but today, my dad was standing at the top of the steps just looking down at me. I remember very vividly him standing there with his hands in his pockets, kind of looking at me then looking away, and he quietly just asked, "Where you going, son?" I just looked up like everything was normal and just said, "I'm going to and so's house." He nodded slowly. "When ya coming back?" I shrugged slowly. "I don't know, Dad." Somehow he knew. I could feel it. I never came back home. Days turned into weeks and months and then years. I could tell he knew. It makes me so sad now when I think of it. Like I tore his heart in two. He has never been a very expressive man, but I could just tell how sad he was. I needed this though. I needed to go off on my own and suffer the real world and grow up some point. It still hurts my heart to think about him slowly nodding after I told him, "I don't know, Dad." Edit. Hey guys, sorry I didn't think this would have gotten much attention. I'm updating this from my iPad. I want to thank all of you for your kind words and even the ones calling me out for being selfish. Sorry if I worried you guys. All too of the emotion you read was in me looking back on the moment. First, I'd like you all to know I have been in contact with my dad since I left, and things are pretty good. I left during a time when cell phones were not popular, and I spent a lot of time on the streets at first with the only thing I owned being a car that I kind of lived out of. Eventually a good friend of mine had his family take me in, and I spent years helping their family while kind of searching for what to do. During this time I would periodically just speak to my dad and stepmom and mom and stepdad on the phone every few months. They knew I was alive and well. My dad never really brought up the fact that I'd left and would just make sure I was doing alright. We just don't have a relationship where we express much. I think he understood as time went on. See, he has this idea of how I should have progressed through life. I wasn't good at his plan. I was too immature. I left not because I was unhappy with him and what he provided me, but more so that I could stand shoulder to shoulder with him and make my own successes. I just wasn't who he expected me to be, and it took a lot of growing away from him for us both to understand that point. After a few years I went to visit him in his office, and it turns out he had bought me a cell phone, my first. It was enough of a sentiment for me to understand that he understood what I needed. He just wanted to talk to me occasionally. I tell my dad I love him every time we talk. We live in the same town, so visit him, and my stepmom with my girlfriend when I can. They love her more than me. A lot of you took the time to write really heartfelt comments, so I will take the time to reply when I'm not on an iPad later today. Anyway, thanks guys. Kinda late, but I'll share my story. I grew up in foster care, and all the homes I lived in either were abusive or run in a business collecting cash to house kids. Format. My actual mom was a very heavy drinker and was abusive, hence being in foster care. As an adult, we had a very good relationship. She was proud of me, impressed with my work ethic, and amazed that I got a fully paid for education via scholarships at the state university. Everything was going swimmingly until I started to do better than my immediate family. They started to think I had abandoned them and that I was too good for them once I started pursuing my education. The last conversation I had with my mother and sisters occurred on Thanksgiving 2011, when I drove 3 hours to sit down and have our first legitimate family dinner in several years. I showed up, my mom was drunk, and my sisters were incoherently intoxicated on narcotics. My sisters yelled at me for abandoning the family and called me unforgivable things. My mother said to me, "I hope you achieve all of your dreams. Lord knows you've abandoned ours." I got up from the dinner and left. I spent the entire drive back home for 3 hours, hysterically sobbing. I haven't talked with them since. I know it was bitterness and the drugs talking, but it really shattered me to the core. My mother passed away this last year. That dinner was the last time I ever saw her or spoke with her. Both of my sisters were incarcerated at the time, so I flew home to clear out her estate. She didn't have anything but a mountain of bills and a house full of items to sort through. I donated almost all of it to Goodwill. While sifting through her belongings, I did find a lockbox. The lockbox contained her wedding ring from my late father and some photos of my sisters and I as kids, perfectly preserved. It also had a single note inside, which was addressed to all three of us, with corresponding paragraphs dedicated to us. My paragraph said, "Daniel, words cannot describe how sorry I'm for how much I have hurt you. It has eaten at me every day for the last 10 years. I drink because I wish I could been the mother you deserved. You are the strongest man I have ever met. I'm sorry. You deserve so much more than I gave you. I love you with all my heart. I hope someday you can forgive me." Mom, it destroys me inside to know that mom died thinking that she didn't mean the world to me. If I'm being honest, I started drinking very heavily after she passed. She died thinking I didn't love her with all my heart. I carry her driver's license in my wallet, above mine, so that every time I take it out I get to see her, but more importantly, so that she can see me, and know that I'm always right here. Anyway, that's my story. Reddit. Thanks for reading. Edit. Wow, I really didn't expect this to get so big when I went to sleep. I've never gotten gold before. Thank you guys. Just to clear up some of the messages in my inbox, I just went on a bender when she died, but I do have my life put back together almost a year later. Unfortunately, my sisters and I aren't on speaking terms. As cliche as it sounds, they still resent me, although I still reach out and let them know that door is always open. Hopefully when they get older we will be able to have a relationship. I understand where they're coming from, and although I disagree, I'm not bitter or angry with them. Thanks for all the kind words, Reddit. Today's gonna be a good day. Second edit. I'm 23. My sisters are 20 and 21. I did this, basically. Told my parents I was going for a hike in the woods for a few days, instead took a flight to Europe, and joined the French Foreign Legion. They figured I was dead for a few weeks, but eventually they figured out what I had actually done. It's been almost 2 years, and I'd still rather not see them ever again, but one of these days I'm gonna have to go back and see all my younger brothers who still live there. As for why, it's a long story. I didn't have the greatest childhood. Basically I decided I had nothing better to do, and life was boring as hell, so I might as well do something stupid or crazy. So I just left and never looked back. Whether or not I'm better off now than I was before is debatable, but at least I can say I've done something with my short little life. Edit. Because everyone keeps thinking I just up and left for no reason. Here's a bit of background info on my life. Parents were / are religious fanatics and complete narcissists with their own special brand of Christianity. They homeschooled me my entire life until I was 17, at which point they kicked me out due to religious disagreements. I managed to survive for around half a year by myself. Unfortunately I was kinda lacking in the life skills department. Basically until I left at 17, I never had any friends, never left the house without my parents, and had no diploma or any other record of me doing school. I also found myself kinda lost without someone yelling at me all the time telling me what to do. So I figured I would join the military. Just do as I'm told, not have to worry about bills or food or anything. Perfect. Unfortunately my national army told me to wait 2 years and I have no patience at all, so the next logical step was obviously to join the FFL. So I didn't last long by myself, ended up coming crawling back to them and staying with them until I turned 18. But I wasn't idle. I saved up money, stole all my documents from the lockbox where they kept them, and bought a plane ticket. And so here I'm now, halfway round the world, speaking a different language, and protecting a different people. American that moved to Australia for 2 years. Got a girl pregnant. Fell in love. Saw her for the horrible person that she really was, but stuck it out. After the baby was born I had to be sure he was mine. The test came back showing no paternal match. I confronted her. We fought. She swore up and down it was a bad test. Wanting to believe it, I scheduled another test for the three of us to go in. $800 later, 2 days before the test, she played dumb and said she never agreed to that. Told me to get out of their life and that her child was not a science experiment. I stayed with a friend a couple days then came back. She acted like nothing happened and wanted to just move on. Another test was no longer an option in her book. It was the hardest decision of my entire life, and it still makes me sick to think about. A week later I scheduled a flight back to California. I've been back for 4 years now. We had talked a bit over the year after I left, but just went back to her wanting to fight. After some antidepressants and heavy drinking, I'm finally starting to feel whole again. I look at the world very differently now. Edit. Thank you everyone so much for your kind words. Uplifting really. I miss that little boy with all my heart. He still has my name and a great deal of loving people that know who I am. I only hope he hears some of good about me when he is older. I did everything for them. I did what I had to. Edit again. Mixed responses. Either way, thank you for showing interest in my post. After having a laptop broken over my head, a vacuum slammed on me while I'm sleeping, and the brother she filled with lies after me, I did what was necessary to defuse the situation. Thanks for the gold, kind sirs, even though I don't deserve it. I was just sharing my story on a relevant post. Parents were split and hated each other, and would always put me in the middle. The drugs and alcohol they were both doing didn't help. Got kicked out of each of their places and went back and forth over some shitty circumstances involving them wanting all of my money to live with them, then playing the guilt card on each other that they took me in when the other kicked me out. Got a steady retail job that I had to work 6 to 7 days a week at odd hours to get full time 2 weeks before Christmas. Mom said her place wasn't a truck stop and I couldn't come and go at all hours of the night and that I had to leave. Heard similar from her before and didn't want to go to dad's again, so I called some family and they all refused to take me in because my mom had called and told them I hit her. Since I was still in the same house I told her she was a horrible person but an even worse mother and left. Grandma knew parents were crazy, so she helped me as much as she could. Still get phone calls /emails/Facebook messages asking me when I'm going to stop being a beach so we can be a family again. Have seen both since. Invited some friends through Facebook to things that they in turn invited my parents to. Finally nutted up and told them both to get the fuck out of my life. Mom still leaves me drunk/high/crying voicemails in the middle of the night either telling me she loves me or that I'm all that's wrong with her life. Dad sends me emails telling me to get the stick out of my ass because I'm still his son. Still spend time with my grandma. Friends' parents mean more to me than my own ever did. Now I've got a full-time job, an awesome dog, working on doing better in life in general, and trying to move into a place solo. Blood is not thicker than water. Will never speak to either of them again if I can help it. No regrets. Edit. I may not have known the original quote, but you get the gist. It just feels so much better to get their garbage off my chest, to be honest. As a child I held it in, and after I realized it made me the man I am. Thanks for kind words, Reddit. Mom cornered me in the bathroom after chasing me around the house. Told me to punch her when I tried to leave. Punched me instead. I said I'd call the cops. She said she'd do the same as she's done with my ex-stepdad. Tell him I punched her and it'd be her word versus mine. Next morning, got into a broken Ford that was still on her name, even though it was mine. Went to get the oil changed. Told the guy how long he thinks the car could make it. He said I'd be lucky to make it a block. Wouldn't go into reverse, among other things. All the same, I thought, I'm only going forward. 3 days later I drove from CA to MD and spent about 5 years without contact. Reconnected. Foolishly thinking people change. People don't change. Last I heard from her, she wanted me to sign over my apartment in Russia so she could sell it and give me the money. I told her I'd happily sign it over, but she didn't need to pretend she'd give me a dime. Like one of the top commenters here, I've also been working since the age of 12. Albeit for much less than $8/hour when I started. paper route etc. Only reconnected because I have sisters. But the brainwashing she's done against me is done. Both sisters suicidal. One is pregnant at age of 18. Failing grades. Neither will take me up on my offers to help. I make 50 plus /HOUR tutoring strangers. Sigh. I'm the pariah who left and traveled the world. But I'm a loser because, well, fuck this thread, fuck you mom. My father just walked out on us when I was 9. Walked out on everything. Racked up a load of debt before he went without my mother knowing. Through a gambling habit he had which we didn't know about until immediately after, and the hounding from the people/companies he'd borrowed money from. Some of them were the kinds of people you didn't really want to owe money to, and the next few years were kinda rough. Point to add to that my mother got sick around the same time and ended up unable to leave her bed for a few years. I think the illness was caused, or at least exacerbated by the shock of his leaving. Not going to lie, it was really rough. I ended up getting homeschooling as they were afraid that he'd show up and pick me up from school one day, and after a little while of that my confidence was so drained that I avoided school as much as possible. Police were looking for him and eventually found him after a year or two in a town 200 miles away, but he didn't want to get in contact with anyone and nothing came of it. He was an ex-policeman, so I guess he knew what to say or something. Then a few years later we got a phone call from a lady who had found his address book, informing us that he had died, and she was looking for his next of kin. It ended with us traveling to where he had been staying, to find an elderly lady he was basically bleeding dry financially. Some of the stories he'd been spinning to manipulate people were incredible. People there thought of him as a hero. He told them about how he'd started a new life after nursing his sick wife with cancer until she passed away. How my brother had been inspired by his story and was working as a doctor abroad, and in his fantasy I had never actually existed. I can't really say I'm angry about it. I grew up afraid that I'd end up like him, but I think when you're exposed to something like that as a child you can either see it as an example of how to live, or you can look at it and do everything in your power to avoid becoming it. I left Tacoma, Washington, US, and went south to Coos Bay, Oregon. I left friends, a girlfriend, some family I'm not very close to. I'm not sure why. I've ditched out a number of times to several different places. I just get tired of the same shit for too long. I don't have any illusions that my problem won't be waiting for me when I get where I'm going, but for a while I feel like a load has been lifted. Part of it is that I've said and done things that I'm not proud of, or that I'm embarrassed or ashamed of. For that and for other reasons I make my bed, but then I get sick of lying in it. Besides, who doesn't want a fresh start? One summer I had an anxiety attack which I didn't believe was a real thing until it happened. That turned into a whole year of just living in fear of another attack, and that fear perpetuating more attacks. I really believe that everything caught up with me. I'd packed away too much and I imploded. Not fun. Fast forward to January 11th, 2012. I checked myself into treatment, got clean, met a nice girl 9 months later who is in recovery too. Today I have over 3 years, she has 5. I'm back in school and paying off my student loans, blew them on partying. I take medication for anxiety, which I never thought I would do, because I think society is over medicated and blah blah. Things are going good. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, 29, but I just don't feel like running anymore. At least not right now. I don't. I spoke to Alexandria, the girl I split on, again. She still lives in Tacoma, and she is okay. She was hurt and confused, but she has since got her revenge on me, which I think cheered her up. Good for her. I would have preferred forgiveness, but I'll take what I can get. Right now I'm somewhere near Seattle in a nice quiet apartment building full of old people. No sirens. No tweakers. Once I started facing my life, good things started happening. It's hard sometimes to maintain perspective. I get angry about stupid things, but I don't blame others. I don't punch holes in my drywall and I don't run from things. Yahoo for me. Wow. I just realized that this kind of applies to me. When I was younger, with my mother things were kind of rough. Pretty abusive actually. Point well, one time when I was 15 things got really bad. It started when her sister moved in. She treated us like slaves. We were expected to cook and clean for her and just generally be at her beck and call. Point well, this one particular night I was expected to cook chicken for her and her boyfriend, then clean it up and basically be her little kitchen slave so she could be the fancier lady. Point this pissed me off to no end. I was expected to not only cook a meal I wasn't allowed to eat, then I had to clean up and do the dishes for that meal for some guy I've never met so she can get laid? What the fuck? I refused. It turned into a big fight. Point so when my mother came home she got mad at me. Point she beat me, but that wasn't even the worst part that I was used to. She slapped me across the face with a slipper. That was by far the least physically abusive thing she had done, but for some reason it was new, and it pushed me over the edge. I silently took it and went to bed. Point the next morning I pulled out my book bag. I packed a few things that meant something to me. It still boggles my mind just picking what's important into a bag in the span of 15 minutes. It changes the way you think about things if you ever have to do that. Anyway, I packed a few things and went to school. As soon as I got there I found a quarter, God knows where, and called a cab. It's funny now because I had to get the operator to dial because I was upset and couldn't figure out how to do it. Point I went to my grandmother's in the next town over. I didn't have 5 cents to my name. She might not have even been home, but I went. When I got there I told her I took a cab and I wasn't going back. Point she of course called my mom, who told my grandmother, and I quote, "Tell him he no longer has a mother." So I lived with my grandmother, switched schools, and no one ever hit me again. Well, until my drunk dad moved in, but that's another story. She was my hero. She was always there for me. I used to look at the lights from my bedroom window and wish I was there with her. She died April 21st of this year. It's hard. My entire life from the point of 15 to 37 was devoted to her. Now she's gone. I still at night look at the lights, but this time they're the stars and the sky, and I wish I was with her. I was going to use a throwaway, but man, anyone who knew me back then and still knows my family deserves to know the truth. I'll also add that this is a very abbreviated version of the story, so if there seem to be some large leaps, know that there are months and even years entirely skipped below. Point I was physically abused by my father and brother and emotionally and developmentally abused by my mother till I left a little over a year ago. Point when I was a kid, my father beat my brother and I. Pretty typical rage-driven physical abuse. Anyway, my brother's psychologist, he was diagnosed bipolar, saw marks on him one day and reported them to Child Protective Services. CPS briefly got involved, but the case was quickly swept under the rug. As far as I remember, I was never actually asked if my father hid my brother, or I that said, as much as I hate to say it, at that age, 14. I think I may have been too scared to tell the truth anyway. Regardless, CPS vanished, but fortunately my father's violence started to wind down. Threat of the law spooked him. Around this same time, however, my brother began to get more and more violent himself. My mother tasked me with restraining him and preventing him from hurting her, himself, damaging our property, etc. This often involved me taking punches to the face, having knives held to my throat, and all manner of other horrible things. I sustained worse injuries at the hands of my brother than I did my father, and my father was the abusive stereotype everyone imagines. My brother was far worse. Point anyway, this all kept getting worse and worse. I really hate writing about it, and I can't imagine it's fun to read either. He was unmedicated, unstable, and completely irrational. He'd be my best friend one minute and the next he'd want me dead, literally be threatening to end my life with one of the large knives my mother refused to remove from the house or keep out of convenient reach. Threats to my life became a part of my daily routine. That's not to say that they didn't terrify me, but they were truly constant. Point this was all made far worse by the fact that my mother homeschooled both my brother and I, so the three of us were together 24/7. She kept me from getting a job or learning to drive, seemingly because she believed that I was the only thing that stood between her and chaos, despite the fact that she is the one who refused to ensure that her son stayed medicated. Point anyway, eventually all of this became way too much for me. I became incredibly depressed, the type of depression that keeps you in bed for days or even weeks. I wasn't sleeping, and on the rare occasion that I'd awake to horrible nightmares about my brother or my father's physical abuse. Eventually I went to her and told her I needed to see a doctor, if only because I needed to get something to make me start sleeping. No dice point. I pushed a little further, pointing out the depression and the nightmares, and suddenly she got incredibly defensive and told me that my father had never hid my brother or I, and that if my family was causing me so much trouble that I should just leave. After years of literally acting as her human shield, to have her turn her back on me like that when I needed something so simple was crushing. Furthermore, to have her deny years of pain that she personally witnessed constantly was gut-wrenching. Though painful, I took her words to heart. I called her bluff, and I left one morning while they were at church. I tossed a few things into garbage bags, put the couple $100 I had into my pocket, and I ran away to a friend's house in another state. Since they left for church that morning, I haven't said a word to them, and I never plan to speak to any of them again. From what I understand, they don't have any idea where I'm at this point, and their attempts to find me have come up empty. Anyway, I ended up scoring incredibly well on the SAT and ACT, and those scores combined with the generosity of a few incredible friends are allowing me to start college this fall, and I couldn't possibly be more excited. Additionally, I've been seeing a therapist who has been helping me work through the years of shit I dealt with growing up, and things couldn't be better. Getting out of that hellhole was the greatest decision I have ever made. I was reading all of these stories when I realized this is me. Here is the short version. I was living with and dating an extremely abusive guy. He told me what to eat, when to eat it, what to wear, where to work, and when to work. Wouldn't let me go to university. Wouldn't let me get a car, so he had to drive me everywhere. I was not allowed to have friends, talk on the phone, use computers, see my family, etc. etc. He wouldn't even take me to the hospital when I was sick. My money was his money, and I was also his personal punching bag. Eventually, he allowed me to enroll in community college. I already had a BA and wanted a MA, but he had me brainwashed and convinced I was too stupid. I convinced him to let me buy myself a car by saying I felt bad for making him drive me around when he could be working from home on his novel. Yup. Gag. Anyway, he was cool with this, as long as he got to pick the car. He picked a piece of shit car that was falling to pieces. He was a mechanic and had me convinced that the car could not go over 55 and wouldn't make it past the community college and back. Time went by. I made friends at the community college. Ex-boyfriend is not happy. Boo-hoo. He belittles me, takes my money, emotionally abuses me, locks me in a basement and beats me for stupid reasons, like breathing while he was playing a video game in such a way that it made him lose. So, I slowly started sneaking clothing items out to my car every day I left for class. Eventually, all of my clothing, which by the way, was in a suitcase, because I was not allowed to have a closet or a dresser, was in the car. He picked me up from a doctor's appointment. I'm not sure why I didn't take myself, and said his niece and nephews wanted to come over for pizza. I told him I didn't think it was the best idea. He got angry. Punches thrown. We get to the house. I walk in, grab a box of shit I had put together, got in my car, and drove 11 hours to my parents' house. He cried like a baby. I laughed in his face. Turns out, that car could go 80 and made it 400 plus miles. Douchebag. Best decision I ever made. I'm about to get my second master's and I have a faking awesome car that I bought with my own money. He can eat shit. Edit. Spelling. I packed my bags and left and never told my flatmates plus supposed friend where I went, if that counts. I may've taken some revenge too. I did a short overseas gap year with a girl I'd befriended in a class at uni. We went to stay with a friend of hers, who turned out to be an incredible jerk. He was a jerk to her when we first got there, but they eventually became best buddies. I, however, simply became the victim of their combined bullying. I was rapped by a friend of his, and simply mocked for it. When, a few days afterwards, his brother came into my room drunk, and I freaked out. I was mocked further for overreacting. I was excluded from doing things with them, and I discovered that my friend was going into my room and snooping through my stuff and reading my diary to then send mocking texts to the 2 other flatmates. I was also working at a corner store at the time and eventually had a mental breakdown while at work, and of course my employer thought I was nuts and didn't care for me at all. I got in contact with some friends of my mother that lived in another city in the same country and made plans secretly to go stay with them. I managed to confuse my employer by giving 4 weeks notice of leaving, but actually leaving after 2 weeks after telling his wife that I'd given 4 weeks notice to him 2 weeks before. They were old and simply thought they'd forgotten. I wouldn't have been able to last in that place for 4 weeks. The day finally comes and all the flatmates went out to have drinks together without me as usual. I told them that I was going out of town with some workmates and wouldn't see them for a few days as they left. I waited for them to definitely be gone, then called a taxi and headed to the train station. I filled 2 bags with their clothes and got the taxi to stop me outside a Salvation Army for a donation as well. There was no way I was leaving them to get off scot-free. I will always remember stepping off that train in the city my family friends lived in. I felt all of the stress, anxiety, depression, the entire ball of suffering wash away. I felt as if I'd walked through a portal from hell into heaven when I saw the family friend there waiting for me on the platform. I will forever have a very close bond with that family and their friends I met when I stayed with them. They were amazing. Funnily enough, that same family came to my mother's rescue when she left her abusive, alcohol-addicted mother some 35 years before. I've seen that girl around, and the encounters have not been pleasant. I actually was called by her while I was still staying with the family, just a day or 2 after I left. I let her scream at me over the phone while I played Sparks. Just put the phone face down on the couch and left her to it. She ranted for a good 10 minutes before she realized I wasn't even listening. I only caught a few words. She wanted to know where I actually was. Fuck knows why. Maybe they were pissed I didn't give notice, so they were missing out on the extra rent. One of the flatmates' father owned the place, so that seems odd. Who knows what the fuck she managed to rant on about for 10 minutes. You'd think I'd been the abuser and she the victim. She also called my parents and told them I was crazy and that I stole from her and her flatmates and that I'd been reported to the local police. My dad, being the douchebag he has a tendency to be, took her side. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Dad. I prefer to not tell him what happened because a retelling is relieving. Letter encounters were similar. The first time, I was leaving uni when she came up behind me and started hurling abuse at me. I simply ignored her and kept walking. I'm sure she looked like a mad woman. The second, it was about 4 years later, and I'd lost a whole lot of weight and gained more self-respect and was pretty unrecognizable. I walked into a clothing store and heard her voice some 5 minutes later. I decided to not attract any attention and busied myself looking at the racks of clothes while she chatted to the clerk. As she was leaving, I saw her out of the corner of my eye and she noticed me. She stopped and stared at me. Her guy friend with her asked her what's up and she said I think, and just stared, unsure if it was me or someone else, then decided to leave it and left. I was fairly terrified, but I also felt pretty smug about it. She's moved country, as have I every now and then. Facebook recommends we be friends, or LinkedIn asks if we want to connect, but otherwise I don't have to deal with her anymore. I do really want to confront her one day, but sadly I'm just too weak. It drives me mad that she hurls abuse at me when she and her friends were the abusers. Fuck people like that. I was in a relationship with a Marine for about 2 years when he decided he wanted to leave the military, move to TX from California, and go to university. I was happy about his plans. I worried about him being deployed again, and I gladly agreed to move with him when he asked. He'd always been the sweetest, most caring man, and I saw a real, beautiful future with him. Boy was I wrong. Within a week of moving, something shifted. We had always enjoyed having a few drinks together, but he could no longer have even one beer without getting extremely angry and sometimes violent. After a while, he began choking me out or hitting me in the face repeatedly whenever he was unhappy with something, which was almost every night. I had just spent every dime I had to move with him, so the option to turn around and move back home immediately was not economically possible. After a few months of physical and psychological torture, I began taking money out of my boyfriend's wallet when I thought he wouldn't notice. I would have gotten a job, but every interview I had I was sporting a black eye and shockingly nobody hired me. Once I had a little stash of cash, I explained my situation to my best friend, and she sent me the last few dollars I needed to rent a car and drive it cross country. The next day when my sociopath ex was at work, I packed up everything I had, spent every dime I had on a car rental, saving a little for gas, and noped the fuck out of there. I have not seen or spoken to him since. Well, this is late. I ran away from an abusive marriage with 3 babies when I was 27. I had absolutely nowhere to go. I just remember that I couldn't take it anymore. I was so controlled and also emotionally and physically abused. Before it was in private, but then he began doing things in front of my children, an infant, a 2 and a 5-year-old. Unfortunately, I did not have a family support system. I just loaded up my old vehicle with all our necessities, changes of clothes and the little money I had, and took off while he was at work. I drove and drove and drove with no idea where to go. After about 6 hours of driving, the babies were restless and crying. We had no food, no more gas, and nowhere to sleep. I pulled over and flashed a highway patrol officer with my lights. In tears, I explained my situation. This officer was so consoling and comforting to me and the kids. He had me follow him just a few short miles to a small county sheriff's station in a small town. The officers took me and the kids in, fed us and helped us. Everyone was treating us like I was their own daughter in trouble. From there, they called a local city council guy and his wife to come and put us up for the night until we could find better options the next day. This couple had 2 older kids and a very large home that looked out over a beautiful prairie. They had plenty of room for us to stay and offered it to me. This was over 20 years ago. I had help in filing for divorce, childcare help so that I could work and eventually move into our own place, which I did. We essentially started our lives completely over in an entirely new place. It was tough, but it was life-changing for us. We've had many ups and downs through the years and we've made fantastic memories. We have since relocated again for marriage and another child with the love of my life. 2 of those 3 babies got married this year to amazing souls. Another is out and living her dream. My stepson just graduated and our youngest is in high school. Our lives are happy and fulfilling. I can't imagine where we would be if it weren't for the help of all those caring, giving and kind strangers. We've always tried to pay it back with our involvement through the years, feeding and caring for the homeless. It doesn't feel heroic to do that stuff either. It's humbling. Throwaway because I lived in an emotionally abusive household my whole life. I hated my life. And for years I always dreamed of walking out one day. So I planned. I secretly started packing my things I didn't need, and hid them under the mess of other things in my room. Under my bed, in the depths of my closet, where my nosy parents wouldn't notice. I had already secured my important documents years before, not trusting my parents with them. Over the years they tried to get them back, but I managed to evade them. So the day after I graduated from my cosmetology school, I was alone for an unknown amount of time, and I had my boyfriend waiting with his mom's van. His car would have been too tiny to fit all my stuff, and some extra boxes for my family to leave. I wrote out 2 notes, one of which I slipped into my grandmother's bag before she left. The other I taped to my door. He came and in under an hour we had packed up the rest of the stuff I wanted to take with me and had it all in his car, and we were on the road. I was a nervous wreck. I still had the phone they gave me, and they called and texted me constantly. I never once replied. I got rid of that phone when I could afford to, and now they'll sometimes call or text me, so I always plan to maybe contact them, but every time I think about it I get scared. These people made my life hell. I wanted to die for so many years. And now I'm free. I've got 2 jobs. I'm paying off my student loans and my phone bill, and I'm about to sign a lease. I'm not on my SO's current apartment lease, but they never noticed me for an apartment with my SO for the first time, and will be saving up for my very first car and to get my license. My family always made excuses as to why I couldn't have a license or a job. Really, it seemed as though they were sabotaging any chances I had of being independent. They never even let me stay alone at night in my old house. I'm on the path to finally getting to do what I love, and I've been planning out a story that had been in my head for over a year, and for once my urge to write hasn't died. I'm happier. I'm better. I'm thriving out of their control, and I don't think I can ever let their poison back in. As it is, I'm still trying to overcome some of the things that I have left from them. And I'll still wake up from nightmares of them finding me, or see someone that looks like one of them, or a car similar to Thiz, and my heart will freeze. It gets hard because of how emotionally closed off I'm from everyone. And my soul doesn't fully understand why I ran, and sometimes pushes me to make contact again. So I don't have anyone I can really talk to about it. So I bottle up most of my feelings from it, which isn't healthy, but I have no choice. It's been almost a year, but I don't think I'll be breaking my silence anytime soon. I don't think I'm strong enough to stand against them. My freedom is too new, too fragile to risk, as is my spirit. The first time was when I was 18. I sold a bunch of my things and saved some money and flew from California to New York City, where I knew some people. Parents threatened to come find me, and I caved and went back after a couple weeks, because before that I was extremely sheltered. The second time was a week or two before I turned 21. My boyfriend at the time lived 7 hours away, so I packed up some things every weekend, drove to his place, dropped my stuff off, hung out, and went back home. Saved money from my summer job, waited until everybody was gone on the annual summer trip, and away I went. They found out where I was because of my phone records, which they were paying for at the time, but I've moved several times since then, and cut off all contact. I have no interest in seeing anyone in my family ever again. I'm much happier without them. Everything I did was micromanaged by my dad. Nothing I did was ever good enough. I could never go out with friends, and thus had horrible social skills. Staying up late got me in trouble, and God forbid I spend any of my money on things I wanted. If I was bad, he beat the shit out of me. I had to tell my friends I walked into a door. I told him I was depressed and wanted to see a psychologist/therapist, and he told me to tough it out and not be a weakling. One of my earliest memories is my dad getting so angry that he was threatening to kick me out and beat me because I was having a tough time learning to read at 5 or 6 years old. I went from being in the top 10% of my high school to ditching every day. My only friends were online in MMOs, so that's all I wanted to do. My mom was completely useless and never stuck up for me, at least that I could tell. I left, and I will never go back. I can't say I hate my parents, but they certainly weren't very good at being parents. Even now, almost 6 years after leaving, I have trouble with communicating my feelings and thoughts because I'm so used to keeping them to myself. My social skills have vastly improved thanks to working, but I still prefer to be alone with my dogs. I have difficulty maintaining meaningful relationships. It's very weird and awkward for me to be hugged or touched by people, even something like holding hands, and if it's unexpected I jump. I'm stuck at a dead-end job, but I'm trying to go back to school now. I just tend to block all the bad memories and not think of the past. Things aren't perfect, but I'm definitely happier without them in my life. I was living with my brother. I was addicted to methadone, which was being supplied to me by my mother. This went on for 3 to 4 years. One day, after a fight with my mother, everything came together for me. I'd always thought she loved her children more than anything in the world. I thought we were suffering an addiction together. Then the facade came down, hard and fast. Things began to add up. I realized that the only thing my mother loved was herself. I realized we weren't suffering together. I realized she was using my addiction to control me. She was continually sabotaging my relationship with my brother, keeping us at each other's throats. She sided with both of us, lied to both of us. I think that's the worst of it. My brother will never understand what I now know as fact. I told my grandparents, mother's parents. Dad has been gone for years, haven't spoken to his family in years. I was leaving. I told them everything. They urged caution, but said they understood. Then I left. I had help from friends and the girl I was dating at the time. At first, all I got were taunting phone calls from my mother. Okay, you've made your point. Call me when you're done with this. Let me know when you're ready to apologize. I took 3 weeks off work to detox and figure stuff out. I didn't speak to anyone from my family. Once I found a place to live, I called my grandparents and discovered what I had missed. My mother had told my entire family, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, that I was a drug addict that had been stealing pills from her for years. I don't know what I expected, but that's when I knew there would be no reconciliation between my mother and I. She had orchestrated the worst years of my life, and when it came time to come clean, she threw me under the bus. This was about 5 years ago. I don't speak to my family much now. Whenever I speak to my grandparents, aunts, uncles, they always assure me that everything is forgiven, that no one holds grudges. They've accepted the lie. I get it. It's easier than the truth. It still makes me sad sometimes. I wish I could talk to them. I wish they believed me, but too much time has passed. My mother used to call me on her birthday and Mother's Day. Always drunk, always late at night, always crying. The phone calls have stopped, but she's found even worse tactics. She uses my other little brother, 12 now, and little sister, 14, to try and get to me through Facebook. Can't you forgive her? She loves and misses you. We all miss you. I've decided to get a restraining order against her. The part that breaks my heart the most, missing my siblings. I try to stay in contact with them through Facebook when my mother isn't using them as puppets. I will rebuild my relationship with them when they are older, when they can understand. Besides all of that, I have been off of methadone for 5 years. I'm completely self-sufficient. I started dating the girl of my dreams 3 years ago, who has been giving me what I need to be a better and stronger person since day one. We live together in a house with 3 dogs and a cat. I have never been happier. I've made some mistakes along the way, but I finally feel like the man I've always wanted to be. Sorry if any of this is confusing. Using mobile. I'd make a TLDR for this, but this sort of is a short version. I know this is really long, but I felt like getting it out of my system. I know I'm late, and probably nobody will see this, but I thought I'd write it up anyway. Throwaway because I don't want people cross-referencing my post history with the information in this post and finding out who I am. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but I don't want to be found. To start off with, I'm a 27-year-old woman. My mother died due to complications while I was being born. I have 2 older brothers and my father, a lawyer, remarried when I was 3 or 4, to a woman who come from a fairly well-off family who had never done any real work in her life. My father and his wife were abusive. So were my 2 older brothers. One of my earliest memories is what must have been my 5th birthday, because my father had remarried by that point, and we were having a party, and had invited the other kids in my preschool class and their parents. I was running around with the other kids playing some game or other, and tripped and either tore the dress I was wearing, or just got it dirty. Either way, my dad got extremely pissed off about it, took me into the house, and blistered my ass. He added another swat for every time I cried or screamed. I could barely walk by the time he was finished with me, and I remember being sore for quite a while afterward. As additional punishment, I wasn't allowed to wear nice clothes at home after that for a long time. Whenever I got home from preschool, or we came home from church, I was told to immediately change out of the clothes I had been wearing, and to put on one of my father's old t-shirts. I was given 2, both with stains and holes in them. Those and my socks and underwear were the only clothes I was allowed to wear at home for what seems like months. I seem to recall that I wasn't allowed to put them in the laundry either, but I might be misremembering that part. My oldest brother, who is 8 years older than me, would terrorize and harass me constantly, and my other brother, who is 6 years older, would help him, but the oldest was definitely the one who initiated almost everything. My dad and stepmom would have them wake me up if I didn't get up the first time the alarm clock went off, and I remember them doing stuff like dumping ice water on me and dragging me by the ankles out into and around the backyard as fast as they could run for a couple laps. I remember them laughing the whole time they did it. I didn't try to sleep in often. As my oldest brother started entering his teenage years, he'd start terrorizing me with dead animals, mostly cats. I never saw him do it, but I suspect he was killing them himself. I have a rather vivid memory of him throwing a severed cat head at me one weekend when my dad and stepmom were away for some reason that I don't remember. I was allowed to watch television, but only what my father wanted to watch if he was home. Otherwise the TV was supposed to be off. I didn't spend much time watching TV. Point being, sick was no excuse for missing school. My dad was pissed the first time he had to leave the office and come pick me up, and after the first time he stopped answering calls from the school altogether. Whenever I was too sick to go to school, I would be literally locked in my room the entire day except for 2 5-minute periods, one in the morning and one in the evening, where I was allowed to use the bathroom. The rest of the time I had to either be asleep, doing schoolwork, reading the Bible, or just laying in bed not making any noise. The only food I was given when I was sick was a can of soup, literally the can and a can opener, no heating it up, no bowl, no spoon, and a slice or two of bread per day. They kept my door locked from the outside during these episodes. This was also a pretty standard punishment for whatever minor infraction might occur, like coughing or something during a moment of silence at church. Point. When I got to middle school, about age 12 to 13 for non-US readers, and we started getting homework, I started making money doing other kids' homework for them when I could. I kept this secret and I hid the money in my school books, because while I doubt my father and stepmother would have objected either to me making money or how I made it, I'm sure they would have confiscated it. I wasn't allowed to see friends outside of school unless it was for a school project, and even then only rarely. My father didn't want me getting in trouble or getting ideas or getting up to any stupid shit. It was also around 12 or 13 that the sexual abuse started, from both my brothers and my father. My father started supervising my showers. At first this was just him standing outside the bathroom door timing how long I was taking, I guess because he didn't want me masturbating or something, but pretty quickly it progressed to him being in the bathroom with me while I was in the shower. He'd sit on the toilet and he'd keep yelling at me to hurry up because I was wasting the hot water. After I think a couple weeks of that, he started actually joining me in the shower. Then afterward he'd punish me for putting impure thoughts in his head. He'd call me a bitch and a hoe and a temptress and demon possessed and a lot of other things I don't recall right offhand, as he either slapped me or lashed me with a belt. Always across the body and on the backside, of course. Nowhere that bruises would show if he hit me hard enough to leave them, which was thankfully rare. He always had an erection in the shower, and as he was punishing me afterward. This went on until the day I left. My brothers, at first, tried to be more subtle about it by sneaking into my room at night and trying to pull back the covers and lift up my shirt to feel my breasts without waking me up, and they might have succeeded at that a couple times, but most times I was awake for it, though I pretended to be asleep. I was afraid of what they'd do if they found out I was awake or tried to resist. Usually it was both of them, but sometimes it was just my oldest brother. It wasn't very long before they started masturbating while doing it, and it seems like it wasn't very long after that they started waking me up and forcing me into sexual acts. At first it was just hand jobs, but pretty soon they started forcing me to give them oral sex. They never tried to penetrate me though. I'm not sure why. If I had to guess I'd say that it's because they didn't want to risk me getting pregnant, but I never asked. This only went on for a couple years. My father got me a job working in an office. I'm not sure what exactly they did there, with somebody he knew, when I was 14. I did stuff like filing, getting coffee, janitorial work, anything an unskilled 14-year-old could handle. I was paid in cash at the end of every day, $5 a day, for what was usually 2 to 3 hours of work. Of course I was required to turn the money over to my father as soon as I got home, lest I spend it on something sinful. I don't know what he did with it. Spent it on cigarettes, is my guess anyway. This kind of thing went on for years. My father came home pissed off about something one night when I was 18, and he kind of threw his car keys and a credit card at me and told me to go fill up his car's gas tank. Why he didn't do it himself on the way home I don't know, but regardless, I took his car to the gas station a couple blocks away and filled it up. Then I got back into the car and started up the engine, and I started thinking for a few minutes. I had a car and a credit card, and even though neither of them were mine, I could still go a damn long way with them. I could get away from my father and his abuse. I could go to a new city and start over, where nobody would know me, or him, or my family, and I could get a job that actually paid me minimum wage, or even more, and it wouldn't be stolen by my father the second I got home. Then I drove back home. I wanted to leave, I really did, but I was terrified of it. I didn't have any friends, and the only money I had was the stuff that I'd saved up from doing other kids' homework, which I was still doing at the time. It took me another 2 years to work up the courage and desperation I needed to finally leave. I snuck into his bedroom pretty late one night, stole his credit card and keys, drove up to the local Walmart, and used his card to buy a pack of gum and get as much cash back as I could. I was terrified the whole time, afraid God would strike me down for stealing, or the police would roll up with their lights flashing and sirens blaring or something. Anyway, once I had the cash, which wasn't much, I drove down to the local bus station and bought a ticket going to the furthest city they went to. Once we arrived, I did it again. I left the car parked on the street a couple blocks away and bent the credit card in half until it broke and threw away one of the pieces immediately. Somewhere in between cities I threw the car keys out the bus window and into the ditch at the side of the road. I stuffed the other half of the credit card into the trash at a convenience store near the bus station. Once we arrived, I didn't really know where I was going. I wanted to get to the other side of the world, but I didn't have nearly enough money to do that, and even if I had, I didn't have a passport, so I settled for another couple bus rides, winding up about halfway across the continental US from where I started, and then I realized I had no idea what I was going to do. Continued below. It started with my first serious relationship. We were engaged before graduating high school and I decided not to go to college. Cliché shit, but I was blind to it all. She always seemed to really like my friends and would hang out with them while not around. The 2 years we were together we broke up a half dozen times. She even threatened to kill herself and held a knife to her wrists. Still I persisted. I remember getting a call on her birthday. We were out go-kart racing from my friends say she was a cheating bitch. Of course I denied it, but the memory lingered. Finally I remember one day walking into her coffee shop saying so and so was in town, and we hung out the night before. She looked so angry, maybe heartbroken, and threw her engagement rings at me from across the bar. She stormed into the back in tears. I walked out. We eventually got together that night and she finally admitted to cheating on me multiple times with multiple people, one of them being the high school best friend I was hanging with the night before. I had it in my head to forgive her, and things were good for the next 6 months. During all of this, I had dropped out of college for 3 straight semesters and held odd jobs at local shopping centers. I spent all my money on taking her out and supporting our weed habit. It seemed we were only happy together while we were high, so I made sure we were stoned all the time. Looking back, I just want to slap 20-year-old me in the face, but at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. Fast forward to the next spring and we've got a place together in town. She's still slinging coffee, and I'm now selling cars, which is a pretty terrible career for an introvert. I digress. Anyways, she starts hanging out with these 2 guys. They seemed nice, but I was a little weirded out by their company. They'd come over late at night while I was trying to sleep, and my ex and them would just sit in the living room all night chatting and chain smoke cigarettes. I remember waking up early one morning to an empty bed. I was pissed, and my ex and guy walked in looking all strung out. They had apparently been at his place all night hanging out watching movies. Something didn't feel right and they left after I got pissed. This incredible blind rage overcame me. A force outside myself propelled me to pack up all my shit and move to my parents' place. I called and told them that I was coming home. They didn't ask any questions. They just knew. I sent her a text message that I moved out, but I couldn't tell you now how she replied. I went over a few days later to get a few final things and found empty condom packs and lube in what was our bedroom. She had been faking this guy who she told me was gay as a cover story after I split, and probably long before then. I was just blind to it all, and I had to have a moment of insane clarity to escape it. It's like having your life reset to a different storyline. 2 months later I had moved to another city and started in earnest to completing my undergraduate. She and that other guy were married. In retrospect I had to have that fuck up to become the person I'm today. It's the one moment that's defined the past decade of my life. I've never told my wife that story either, and, for the first time, recently confided some of the details to a mutual friend. I'm still ashamed at being so young and I'm blind to all my friends' sage advice, yet liberated that life goes on and springs eternal even in our moments of despair. I grew up in a lower class household, a child of immigrants. We were poor, or at least I believe we were, but seemed to be happy. My younger sister and I were active, intelligent, with engaged parents. School events, Cub Scouts, music classes, sports. We never went hungry, always had a roof over our heads, and generally felt safe and loved. When I was 10, my father just disappeared. No warning, no contact. Life went immediately to hell. It seemed there was never enough food. The utilities came on and off. The social support structure disintegrated. I never saw my mom because she had to attend school to start a career. My grades plummeted. I started getting into trouble. I hated him. I cannot describe the vitriol that rattled in my mind about my father. I knew at some point that he had left voluntarily, ostensibly for a girlfriend and her children. I swore that if I ever saw him again I would kill him for utterly destroying our lives. That wasn't a private thought either. My grandmother asked me once what I would do if I saw him, and I told her very directly and dispassionately. It was the only time I saw her scared, so I can't imagine how that came across. Two things saved me. My grandparents were wonderful. They basically instilled every positive attribute I carry to this day. Dedication, loyalty, being goal-oriented, and treating others as I want to be treated were their living principles. If it weren't for them, I would have ended up a train wreck. Second, I just decided that I was going to be better than him. I made it my mission in life to exceed my father in every metric just to spite him. As a result, I excelled at almost everything I put my hand to. I started doing groundskeeping at 13, washing dishes at 15, waited tables at 16, management by 17, military at 18, and working in a professional environment by 21. By 25, I had established my career and was making more than my parents combined. I was safe, successful, and with a bright future. That hatred never faded though. Not for a moment. It was the fire that fueled my drive. That year, he reached out to me for a meeting. I met him at a restaurant coming from work. I was teaching in a professional environment, so was in suit and tie. He showed up in torn jeans and a ratty t-shirt, looking like someone I wouldn't even approach on the street. Immediately all of the hatred disappeared. The thought that popped into my head was that this was what I had been contemptuous of all those years. He was living in a trailer park in Texas with girlfriend 3 or 4, I can't remember which, with any number of random kids. I went from hatred to pity. He made some half-hearted attempt to offer to help me, which only made me want to vomit. I needed nothing from him and wanted even less. We were cordial, we parted ways, and I never heard from him again. I had 1 point now. I have the same drive, but I'm driven to do things for positive reasons. Even after all these years, I don't know if there's a lesson to take away here. If anything, it's that only you can ultimately determine your own destiny, no matter what you are faced with. Results count. You just have to decide to do it. Probably won't get seen, but I have a story from the other perspective. When I was 9, my mother disappeared. She and my dad were never married, and they did not live together. She was supposed to pick me up from school one Friday, and I was supposed to spend the weekend at her house. My dad was going camping for the weekend, and had left early Friday. I talked to her on the phone Friday, and was super excited to see her. Anyways, Friday evening rolls around, and she never showed up. By supper time I decided I would just walk home. The school was closing, and I was too embarrassed to tell them she had forgotten. So I walked 16 kilometers to the other side of town and went home. I tried calling my dad, but his phone was already out of service and hers was shut off. She never did come. I spent the weekend alone, and on Sunday, when my dad came home, I had never seen him so angry. He felt horrible for leaving me alone all weekend. At first I thought she died. Nobody knew what happened to her. I got over it fast and forgot about her. About 4 years ago I graduated high school. She ended up calling me and wishing me a happy 16th birthday. It wasn't even my birthday and I would have turned 18. She still tries to talk to me. I never knew what happened or where she went. I never asked. I guess a part of me doesn't care. If she didn't care enough to stay, then why should I? I'm her oldest. She has 4 other children, all with different dads. All of them don't live with her. I guess she's just not a great person. PS. My dad married when I was 3 to a woman I've always called mom. I have a mom. This thread's been up a while, so not sure if anyone will get to read this, but it's my story. I went out to the shop to literally buy cigarettes and never came back. I was never really an academic kind of guy, but my parents were. I got okay grades at high school, some the equivalent of A's and others more toward the lower end of the spectrum. Then I ended up going to study, and my parents were quite proud, but I hated every second of it. Started to feel as though my life wasn't my own. I just wanted to work, earn some money, and start my life, because at that age it's all you want to do, not relentlessly move from studying to studying. So anyway, I had just recently turned 18 and had been at university for around a year, give or take. My parents always opened my mail, so if I ever wasn't attending or my grades that came through were bad they would find out, and the verbal abuse, sometimes physical, would begin, and the hour-long lectures about why I was a loser would commence. So anyway, it was one of those times when the "your life is going to be shit because you are shit" lectures was just finishing, and I had what alcoholics refer to as a moment of clarity, as Samuel L. Jackson would put it. I stood up, got my car keys from the side, and just got in my car and drove from the uppermost point in Scotland, where I lived, all the way down to London. Got a job, got a room, couldn't afford a flat with my meager savings. I'm now in my 20s and earn over £80,000 a year for a FTSE 100 company. Never been back. I send Christmas and birthday cards, but that's it. They don't know my address or my contact information, and I want to keep it that way. Mom married an alcoholic and she became an alcoholic while I was in middle school. Realized that they spent all night at the bar, which meant I could spend all night put with older kids getting in trouble. No boundaries were set, and they didn't care. I was out doing B&E, to pawn stuff for money, to buy drugs and alcohol at the age of 15. Somehow I actually graduated high school. Mom kicked me out right after. I got a ride into the city, met up with some crust punks, and followed them around for about 2 years. Made my way to Syracuse for Hellfest in 2003, and met some Canadians there. They took me in, and I went back to Hamilton and lived there for about a year. Then made my way back to the States through Ohio, Pittsburgh, Connecticut, New York City, and then eventually back home to Baltimore, because I grew tired of the drug/alcohol filled transient life. Plus I liked showers and enjoyed shaving. I didn't speak to my mom from 2000 to 2006. I kept in touch with my grandmother though, and she relayed information to my mom. My grandmother would Western Union me money when I was in between dumpster diving and odd jobs. Upon returning back to Baltimore, I enrolled in college, paid my own way through, and graduated. It's only been since 2011 that I started speaking to my mother on a regular basis. I ended up moving away then because I felt I was being sucked back into my mom's bullshit. Moving away again was the best thing ever for our relationship. I'm in Pennsylvania now. Close enough to keep a healthy relationship with my mom by every other month visits. I have a good job. Just bought a house in March. Still single, no kids, and turning 33 next month. I'm finally emotionally healthy and ready to settle down for the next step in life, and couldn't be happier. One day, just over a year ago, I woke up in the afternoon on a beach in Miami, Florida. I didn't know who I was, where I was, or how I got there. I had to go through my pockets to find out information that I could follow, like from Memento or something. Turns out, I had a key card from a hotel nearby, and when I went back to the room, I found my wallet. The ID and stuff inside looked so foreign to me. I was so confused and terrified that I threw up in the sink. I thought I had gone on a bender or something and just had short-term memory loss. but slowly I started to recall details about myself and my life over the next 12 hours or so. It was like trying really hard to remember someone's name, and only when you stop thinking of it does it come to you. I had been gone 6 days. I remembered driving to Florida from Colorado, where I'm from, but I couldn't remember why I had left. I have a wife and 3 kids, decent job, no major life problems, no real debt or crisis. I found my phone in the hotel bathroom, and once I remembered who my wife was. Very weird moment, let me tell you. I called her. Chaos ensued. Police and ambulance showed up within minutes after I told my wife where I was. I spent a few hours getting checked out at the local hospital, but the only thing wrong was an elevated blood pressure. My brother-in-law, who lives in Jacksonville, Florida, came and met me at the hotel and drove home with me to Co. I was pretty much me by then, so we talked most of the way home, trying to figure out what had happened. Here's where it gets weird. As soon as we arrive in Co, I start feeling uneasy, like uncomfortable or fidgety. By the time we are close to my house, I'm downright twitching in my seat, sweating and nervous as hell. The only way I can describe it is to say it felt like what I imagined being delivered to prison for the first time must feel like. Read into that how you will, but that is the truth about how it felt. I love my family. I was happy to see them and hug them. I could tell that I truly missed them because I needed to hold them when I got home more than anything else. We talked at length about what had happened, and honestly there wasn't really any anger after the first few minutes, because I think we all knew that I didn't willingly leave them. I had left around 9 AM on a Sunday, when my kids were either asleep or playing video games in the basement. I had been eating breakfast with my wife when, according to her, I just stopped talking all of a sudden, and I was just staring out our back door for about 5 minutes in a sort of catatonic state, she said. I wouldn't answer her questions, and she thought I was being a jackass, so she got mad and went upstairs to take a shower. She told me that I came up to the bathroom and said I'm going out to get some coffee, a normal thing for me to do while we are cooling down from an argument. I just left with what I had on and what was in my pockets. The last thing I can remember, and it's still very foggy, is sitting at the table, looking at my hand holding a fork. After that, sunshine and sand. Fast forward to today, my marriage and my life are generally okay. We have our ups and downs like everyone else, but I feel very much in love with her, and I definitely love my kids more than life. My job is okay, somewhat stressful, but fairly easy. I'm an account manager for a steel company. I did all the tests my doctor requested, and nothing came back abnormal, other than my BP still being elevated, around 130/95 on average. I see a psychiatrist twice a month, but after a year, even he says I'm relatively mentally healthy. The problem is that, every few days or so, I feel this immense need to run away, like something is pulling at my brain to escape to somewhere, anywhere else. Sometimes, when I'm driving home from work, I start to shake and sweat, and I get nauseous, until I get inside my garage. I eventually calm down after a few minutes, but it's a regular occurrence now, every few days. I talk, at length, with my shrink about it, and I feel like I'm opening up about my feelings, but these events aren't going away. I can't tell my family about it, because I don't want to scare them into thinking I'm going to leave again. What I'm afraid of is another blackout event that I don't come back from. Anyway, sorry for the lengthy post, apparently I had to get that out. Alright, here's my story. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this story and I know I deserve a part of it. But I have made my choice and now my life is better for it. I was university and met a girl who I fell in love with. I was a naive child back then, it being my first love and all. I found out a few months down the line that she had become pregnant at the age of 12 and already had a child that had been given up for adoption. I accepted this. Then I found out she had a miscarriage 6 months before she started university. I accepted this too. Stupidly. She had told me multiple times that she was on birth control, the tube they put in her arm. I can't remember the name, but I still insisted on using condoms regardless. We've had a very horrible relationship. I was jealous and that made me paranoid, and she was a cheater. We did not work. In the end, one night the condom broke. I have my suspicions that she did something to the condom because she was the one who gave me that one at the spur of the moment. I asked her to take the morning after pill. She put it in her mouth and that was that I'd have presumed. She had birth control and a pill, so we should be covered, right? I was wrong. She hid the pill under her tongue. I then found out that she had lied about being on birth control at all point first. When she told me, I took it on the chin and said that we should talk about this and that I'm 100% prepared to have the baby with her. We sat down and after a chat we decided to have an abortion. She sided with us and everything was okay. I went out for a smoke and came back into her telling everyone, all my friends and everything, that I was forcing her to have an abortion and threatened her. I knew at this point, once all my friends turned on me, that she had been using me. When I brought up the fact that she was a bit too far ahead in her pregnancy due to the condom only breaking a week before, there was a time when I was out of the country for a while and she had slept with 5 different guys in the time. Without a condom, she became violent. It's then and there that I sat down and logically looked at my options. I could have the child, go through the process of finding out if it's mine or not, have to live with a dysfunctional girlfriend, leave university and find a full-time job because she had never worked a day in her life. Or I could just leave, cut all ties, get into another university in a few months' time, work there and start a new life and sort myself out. I knew that if I told people my story, I would be seen as the bad person, as the irresponsible one. I knew that I could say I did it for the child in growing up in such a horrible state, but in all honesty, I couldn't care less. I did this for me. So I left. I packed my bags in the night, left a note saying, since I have been sketched as the bad guy, why not complete the picture? And drove away. I haven't spoken to anyone from that point in time. And I'm now running 2 businesses of my own, with a degree in mechanical engineering. Am I an ass? Yes I'm. Did I make the right choice for me? Yes I did. When I was 13 I was living with foster parents because my single mother was too busy drinking herself to death and hitting anything that moved to now do mother stuff. The foster mother was addicted to painkillers and the foster father was a violent, controlling rapist. When not in school I had to clean the house and cheat. My sister could have warned me as she had been there before me, but she had deluded herself that she was in a relationship with the foster father. Anyway, on my 14th birthday some friends from school organized a surprise party. It was at a mate's house. The school was 5 minutes from where I lived, and if I wasn't home within 10 minutes of the school bell I would be attacked with various furniture and sports equipment. I was already in trouble for some trivial crap, missed some cat hair vacuuming or some such, but figured in my dumb 14-year-old head that, because it was my birthday, hostilities might be briefly suspended. Nope. Had a big wooden chest thrown at me when I came downstairs for breakfast. So, after school I think, fuck it. I go to the party. I probably had a couple of beers, I really don't remember. It was just socializing with school friends, mostly ones I played music with. Totally innocent. When I got home I was pretty brutally bashed. Then he changed his tune for some reason, like he's a faking psycho, and acted like things were normal, and took me up the street to return some videos. Yes, I'm old now. He marched me to the school where he demanded of the teachers that I not be allowed to associate with my friends or do any more music related stuff. Then he marched me to the local doctor, where I was told to book in at the desk and wait for a faking rap kit to be done, so he could see if I had gone and betrayed him by having consensual sex with someone who wasn't him. That freaked me out. I knew my mates hadn't done any such thing, and was afraid of what the examination would involve. No, not afraid. Pretty terrified. I still had the videos with me as I sat in the waiting room. He stopped in at the pub to say hello to someone, and a decision formed in my mind the moment I was alone for a few minutes. I walked out of the waiting room onto the footpath, so scared he would see me. I hailed the first taxi I saw, and told the driver, I have no money and the only collateral I have are these videos. Please can you just take me away from here a bit more than walking distance? Good guy cabbie drove me all the way to the city, and that, my friends, is how kids ended up loitering the steps of Flinders Street station before emo was invented. Point as an endnote, I saw the cunt again for the first time in more than 20 years just a few months back. My band was in a book/art project about local punk, and he was invited to the opening too because he was in a one-hit wonder sheet pop band that somehow got mixed up in punk retrospectively by people who never listened to it. He approached me with a big grin, saying hello as if it was normal. I turned and ran up the stairs back to the safety of my band and the free alcohol. He messaged me on Facebook the next day, livid that I had humiliated him. I responded, lol, you think you get to speak to me? And blocked the cunt. I lived with a woman that was plain worthless. No job, horrible diet, no self-esteem, so extremely jealous, and she had a daughter that got away with terrible behavior regularly. Just like Radun Kang's story in a nutshell. I tried with her for 3 years, because I'm a faking idiot. The fighting was ridiculous, mostly about how I couldn't provide everything we needed by myself. She had a job 6 months in, then just grew accustomed to not having one, made excuses, etc. One night she tried to grab a Xbox controller out of my hands violently, and I snatched it back. We screamed at each other for a while, then I went for my typical walk, because there was no reasoning with a crazy person. I came home, and she had called the cops, and said I hit her. I thought I was screwed. Apparently not having violent charges on your record gives you a little credibility, because when the cops saw she had no sign of struggle in the house, or on her body, they took my side. Okay, this result is either 1. I'm really lucky, 2. People know when you're insane and absolutely full of shit. I left the next day, and really told her I needed a pack of smokes, lol. Today I'm in a very healthy relationship, and making a lot more money, but most of all feel truly healthy and happy. I still don't know why we subject ourselves to emotional torture. If your woman treats you bad, trust me and move along. There are rational women. You will not find them until you're single again, unfortunately. I was 16, had managed to get an apprenticeship as a chef 3 months before Christmas. Turns out once my probation period ended, January 2nd, that there was no apprenticeship, and I was just cheap extra labor for the busy period. The only way to not offer me an apprenticeship was to say that I was awful, lazy and never showed any initiative. This was told to the apprenticeship board and my parents, who by the way, are both step-parents. My mother died at my birth. Father remarried and died himself when I was 12, and my stepmother moved in with another guy who promptly believed every bullshit word of it and made my life hell. Stepmother very next day gave me bus fare to the city and an apple and told me to get a job, any job, and did this for the rest of the week. That is not how you get a job. Naturally I would get home each night without a job and cop more abuse and be called a loser and lazy and a waste of space. Point on the last night I was screamed at for not emptying the rubbish bin and a huge fight erupted. I felt very alone in the world. So I turned, walked out the door at 9 PM into the dark without a cent in my pocket, and walked 5 kilometers to my cousin's house on my birth father's side. They took me in, and she got me a factory hand job at her work. 3 months later I scored another chef apprenticeship, aced it, suddenly felt worthwhile, and went on to cook in the UK and run a major restaurant in my hometown. Had a very successful 18-year career as a chef. Then upped and quit the trade, headed to uni at age 34. 4 years later graduated with a degree in archaeology, and have been working as an archaeologist for the past 12 years. It took me almost 10 years to make contact with my family again, then only briefly. In the last few years I have visited them twice. They live on the other side of the country now. We speak maybe once every 2 years and I get a text message on my birthday. We are not close, but I've had a very good 34 years out of their influence, and I'm much better for it. I was about to turn 19. My parents died when I was little, and I bounced from one place to another for a while, but I did end up in a single house and a single high school, so that's pretty good. Even better that the person I was with then was a family member, even though they were never home, and I was basically left to my own devices. Before that was a lot of abuse, physical, sexual, psychological, rap, molestation, you name it. During my senior year I found myself quite stuck in a seriously faked up relationship, based pretty exclusively on his pleasure, which came from my non-consent. It was pretty faked up point, but I graduated, was headed to college, and freedom, and I moved into my own place, and got settled for about a week before Hurricane Katrina came along, and set everything underwater. I ended up across the country with a girl I had known about 2 weeks, and tried to function at school in a different state. Moved back to New Orleans that January to pick up where I left off, and while I had my tuition covered thanks to a state scholarship, I had nowhere to live, nowhere to work, no car, no books, just basically nothing. Again, I slept around for a place to sleep, couch surfed a bit, slept on the streets when that didn't pan out. I was drugged and abducted out of state for a weekend, and even though I was there and walked away with my health, I really still don't understand that incident. There was a lot more up. It was not a fun few months. I cracked in May. I had finally landed a job and a place to live for about a month when everything just caught up with me all at once. I bought a plane ticket to somewhere far the fuck away. I told my best friend, who lived about 100 miles away at the time, I was going, and told her she was welcome to join me, but that I was going, and not to tell anyone. She didn't point. I wasn't sure if I was leaving forever or not, until the day before I got on the plane, when I found out I was pregnant. I left for good. I started contacting good friends a few months later, when I felt safely removed from all situations there, and was freaking out just a little bit less. Eventually contacted family. Went down to visit a couple of times over the next 7 or so years, until I realized it was time to go home. I've been back for a few years now, and it still feels a little shaky, like people expect me to bail again at any time. But every time I step out my front door, I breathe in the air here, and I look at the sky, and the trees, and the cockroaches that are everywhere, and I'm very happy to be here, home. I'm very happy I left, and I'm very happy I'm home. I had a decent job before I moved out, and involved with this guy who lived 4 hours away. My parents just hated him because he was 4 years older than me. I was a little lonely growing up because I was awkward and a little overweight. My sisters hated that I was overweight, even though they were as well, but they just hated the fact that I was getting attention from someone. Parents would beat on me, sisters would as well. After graduation from high school I finally wised up and moved out. I knew I had to go quietly, because I just knew they were going to be angry with me, even though they wanted me gone. Before I left I would pack my stuff up slowly and quietly. The morning I left everything was in boxes. I had planned that specific day to leave quietly, because I knew people would have been at work and school. I waited for my boyfriend to pick me up, and once he came we packed up my boxes in his truck and left. Once they discovered I left they first sent threatening phone calls letting me know they will be reporting me to the police for stolen property. Whatever clothing I had belonged to them apparently, and they wanted it back. Left voicemails that they were going to shoot me if I ever stepped on their property ever, and then filed a missing persons report and tried to get my boyfriend arrested for kidnapping. I was 18. Police called my cell phone letting me know about the police report, and once I called the officer back he informed me that if I voluntarily left the household there was nothing they could do. Also, since I'm of age they shouldn't have had been bothering me about my choice of partner to begin with. That was enough reassurance for me to never go back. I'm now married to said boyfriend for 8 years now. We have a 2 and 3 year old, living in our own. Family has nothing to do with us. I'm 25. I have a history of an abusive father and stepfather. I was an A student most of my life till about 15, when I stopped caring. I had many unstable relationships, friends, and boyfriends. Then, I really picked a winner, and moved to another state with him. He was a recovering heroin addict, and moving to a new environment was important for his recovery. It lasted a year. I ignored all the signs that he was using. One day I woke up, and I had enough. I got a hotel, and packed my bags. He called me at 4 AM, said he had my cat, and was going to kill her. I came back. I parked around the corner, so he wouldn't hear me. I snuck in the yard trying to find my cat. All of a sudden I was on the ground as he beat me and choked me. I have a hard time remembering what he said. I just remember the image of looking into the sky knowing I was already dead. Finally he let go of my neck, and reality came back. He dragged me to a hole he had dug for me. He started to nod out. He told me he would go get his gun, and for me to wait there. I grabbed my cat, and ran to my car. I'm still recovering from a lot of things. The trauma of the night never has left me. I have a lot of flashbacks. I have guilt that doesn't make any sense. I no longer want to repeat cycles. I'm in therapy, and every time I go I feel a weight lifting off of me. Coming back from that night meant that I needed to learn more about myself. It's been a painful process, but life is great now. I live with a loving man who slowly but surely is helping me become the person I want to be. I never knew that this is how I'm supposed to be treated. My 15-year-old sister is moving in with us next week. I'm in school, and I work full-time as a caseworker. I have never been more positive and grateful for every day. I love my life. Mine is a bit different. I pretty much told my ex-wife to go for cigarettes and don't come back. We had been together for about 5 years with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. She met a new group of people through works who were a bit younger than us and had no children. So she got caught up in the partying, drinking, drugs scene they were all in. She would go out for coffee with one of her guy friends after work to not come back home until 5 AM. When questioned she would insist they were watching movies. Someone howled when I complained and said this isn't right. It turned back onto me for being a controlling HOLE. One day she left her MSN Messenger open, remember that, and her conversation with her friend had information in it that confirmed they were in a sexual relationship. That was the tipping point, and asked her to leave. She was more than happy to. I prepared a separation agreement for her to sign. In exchange for her not paying me child support, she signed over her rights to our children. I had full custody, not that she cared at the time. She was free of us, and could be with her younger guy friend. A few months later he cheated on her with her best friend at the time. She wanted back with me and the kids. Not happening. I raised my children as a single father for the next 5 years, and wouldn't change 1 second of it. I met and married a wonderful woman about 5 years ago, and my children have a great mother in their life now. Their birth mother sees them once in a while, but is struggling the whole life. My family, including an amazing stepdaughter, are loving life. This wasn't me, but me helping a friend. I have a tendency to make friends with similar issues. One issue that's pretty blatant in my group of friends is that quite a few of us have or have had abusive mothers. It was junior year of high school. I was fed up with my PE class and was ready to ditch it when a friend who was in the class came up to me and asked if I wanted to leave. It seemed like fate, because after a swift lie about grabbing my inhaler, I had my things out of the locker room and we just left. This friend and I walked for a while and began to talk about more personal things that we usually do. I had recently moved out of my meth head mother's house, although it wasn't an I'm going out for cigarettes experience, and I told him a bit about it. He looked a bit somber and told me that his mother was just as bad and that he was looking to leave her today. Having just gotten out of a bad situation, I was more than eager to help. We were originally headed for the bus station, but we detoured and went by this friend's house. He warned me that his mother may be there and that she might know what he was up to. I was ready to help him in any way that I could. We enter his house, and he was right. His mother was there. She didn't seem to know exactly what was going on, but she obviously was suspicious. She had hidden a bunch of his things in case he wanted to leave, and she took money that he had hidden away to take the bus. His mother was intense, in a way slightly different than what I was used to. My mother was a meth addict who was very loud and very verbally abusive. His mother wasn't loud, but still destructive. You're never gonna find your stuff. Quit trying, you little prick. If you leave I'm gonna call the police. This kinda thing went on, and I ended up standing in between her and him while he dug around the house looking for his things. He only managed to find a small bag of his toiletries. He figured that was enough for now, as I'm sure he was already fed up with his mother, and we headed out the front door. What we didn't know was that this friend's grandmother was home, and she completely understood what my friend's mother was like. She crept out of the house while the mother called the police and hugged the both of us. She gave him a little bit of money. I think she said it was all she had thanks to the mother, and told him that he needed to be strong. She looked towards me and told her grandson that I was a good friend, and after a quick goodbye, we walked as quickly as we could to the bus station point. There were two types of buses that came to our station, local and county. I walked my friend to the county bus stop and gave him the last of the cash in my wallet, save for bus fare, and I wished him luck. He told me that he was trying to make it to another county and where he was going to live with a friend. We said our goodbyes and parted ways. Their point, I can only assume that he made it to that friend's house, since I never saw him at school again. My father dropped out from his family sometime in the early 1950s. I never knew his family. He told me about his brothers and sisters, but he said they were all dead. He said the last, a brother, died fighting in Vietnam. My father died in the late 1980s. Some years ago I happened to be in Washington DC, near the Vietnam Memorial. It has all the names. I looked up my uncle, but he wasn't there. I was puzzled, but didn't do anything about it until a few years after that, early 2000s. I looked up my father's original last name. I knew he had changed it in the 1950s online and found the name and phone number of one of my uncles. I called, and sure enough it was a cousin. Then the truth, came out. None of my aunts or uncles had died when my father said. Only one, my cousin's father, had died even by then. The rest were all still living and wondering what had happened to my father. I had an aunt who had lived in the same house, with the same phone number, for about 50 years, hoping my father would get in touch. None of us know what really happened. My father was in the army, and then in military intelligence, and as far as I know he lived in Germany/Poland after WWII, pretending to be German, working with people fleeing the rise of the Iron Curtain, interviewing them maybe, gathering information, maybe serious spy work. We don't know the details for sure. As far as I know, that all stopped by the mid-50s. His family is convinced that it went on after that. They say that whoever they contacted looking for him denied his existence, as if he had been disappeared. I don't know how seriously to take that, but by the time I knew him, I'm pretty certain he was just a regular guy. But even years later he could speak Polish and German fluently, with multiple regional accents. TLDR, here's a banana for scale, banana. I grew up with an incredibly abusive family. I did not have any boundaries, and they continued to attempt to abuse me in my early adulthood. I moved away from them in high school and led an independent life, but I never could completely cut them off. They would always guilt me into having a relationship, telling me that I was the one at fault, that I was crazy, that the abuse did not exist, etc. I'm a gamer, and in my mid-20s I was pretty active in console gaming. I was not looking for a relationship at the time, but started really connecting with a guy I constantly gamed with. He lived 12 hours away, and it eventually evolved into visits. At the time, I was also very ill, and in and out of the hospital, and close to losing my job. Add to that the constant emotional abuse of my family, and I was hanging by a thread. When my significant other asked me to move to his state, I went for it. We have now been together 5 years, and married for 4 years. I had contact with my family for some of the time, until my grandmother died. She was the only person who gave a shit about me and my family. They did not have a funeral, did not give me time to come down and say goodbye to her, and cremated her before I could get there. That pretty much did it for me. I have no interest in ever seeing any of them again, and I'm happy and content with that decision. I don't plan on ever going back to see them. I'm currently going through tons of therapy just to get over my childhood and adult experiences, and it has been suggested that I not contact them. It is hard for me sometimes, but when I think about them cremating my grandmother, throwing her ashes in her backyard, and then selling her house to strangers, it isn't that fucking hard anymore. I'm a little late to the party, and it's not quite the same as walking out of the house and never coming back, but I once did something that was every bit as abrupt. About 4 years ago, I was living in Charlotte and went up to Rhode Island on a business trip. Over the weekend, we took the commuter rail into Boston, where I happened to meet a girl I would end up dating for the next 2+ years. For the first year and a half or so, we did long distance as she stayed up in New England. Then she decided to come down to Charlotte for the summer. She was still in school at the time. Summer came and went, and she decided to stay and finish her degree online because she only needed one more semester of filler classes. Neither of us ever adjusted particularly well to Charlotte, but it was a lot worse for her than it was for me. I made a couple of friends and had a good job, but I was never really happy there. She, on the other hand, couldn't keep a job for more than 3 months at a time for various reasons. And outside of those jobs, she never met anybody. She had clinical anxiety and depression, but couldn't afford to find a therapist in Charlotte and stopped taking her meds a few months after she moved. I was her entire support system in that town, and it was too much for one person. Sometimes she'd even come along on business trips because she couldn't stand to be alone. I snuck her into my hotel room on more than one occasion. The problem was that we couldn't communicate our issues without it blowing up into a huge fight. I don't mean a few testy words. I'm talking about screaming loud enough to wake the neighbors, slamming doors, etc. That's not my style, but it always eventually escalated into that with her. She was almost always the one to raise her voice first, and I wasn't going to sit there and take it as she yelled at me, so I yelled back. As time went on, the codependency and dysfunction only got worse and worse. She would leave piles of stuff in my apartment. I would ask her to clean up, and she wouldn't. She wanted to have sleepovers all the time, but some nights I needed alone time, and it was always a struggle to get her to leave. There was more, but the idea is the same. Issues were identified and rarely resolved. I believe these are the kinds of issues we could have been able to work through if we really tried, but at the end of the day, I could not see a future with her due to a bigger reason than all others. We were too far apart in our core values. That killed any desire I had to really sort these things out. However, at the same time, I was afraid to break up with her in Charlotte because she had no support system there. The only friend she had besides me was her roommate, and they weren't particularly close. With her depression and anxiety, I was legitimately concerned about what might happen if I broke up with her and she was alone in a city that wasn't hers. She would need friends and family to be there for her after a breakup, and she didn't have any in that town. After a little more than a year, it was clear that Charlotte was just not working out for her, but she was too in love with me to want to leave. I also had come to hate life in Charlotte. Between her, my job, and the things I hated about the city, I was crumbling under the stress. I even had a bout with shingles as a result. We eventually agreed that it was time for her to move back to New England and find work in the field she wanted to be in, which just wasn't available to her in Charlotte. I talked to recruiters in Boston and Maine about jobs in my field, but the sense of dread was building in me. It took me a while to admit it to myself, because I love New England, but I couldn't move there for somebody I knew I didn't want to be with forever. So, I lied. I told her we'd go ahead and move her back up there, and I'd follow when I found a job. In reality, I was searching for a job, except I was looking in Charlotte and in my hometown of Raleigh. I never told her that until later. I ultimately got an offer in Raleigh and decided to take it. The next day, I secretly booked a one-way ticket from Boston to Charlotte for the following week, under the guise of moving most of her stuff home and then spending a few days at her family's lake house. We crammed all the belongings we could fit into her car and drove on up to Maine. We arrived around lunchtime the next day and stopped at her parents' house to unload the car. We had the place to ourselves because her parents were at the lake house. I sat her down, had a breakup conversation, and left in a cab that my mom had arranged to have waiting outside. The cabbie took me to the bus station, where I caught a ride to Boston, then flew home. It felt a little selfish to blindside her and walk out to let her family deal with it, which cast a dark cloud over their week at the lake. But when the alternative was to break her heart and leave her with nobody around to help her out, it seemed like the lesser of two evils. 2 weeks later, I left Charlotte to start the job in Raleigh. Almost 2 years have passed since then. During that time, my stress has returned to normal levels. I have a much healthier life outside of work. My relationships with family members have improved, and I've met the girl I'm going to marry. She found a steady job to help her get on her feet, met another guy, and moved in with him, and recently started a job in her dream field, which she absolutely loves. We still talk enough to keep each other informed of the major life happenings, but we are not really close anymore. She understands why I blindsided her, but she'll never forgive me. And really, that doesn't bother me. She needed to be around her friends, family, and therapist, and she may not agree with the method I chose to make sure it happened, but it worked. We are both much better off than we were before, and if I could go back and do the entire breakup all over again, I wouldn't do anything differently. TLDR, got into long distance relationship, which became short distance relationship. Turns out there were too many issues and too little desire to work through them, but I feared what would happen if I broke up with her in a town where she has no support system. Drove her back home to her friends and family, broke up with her, rode off into the sunset. Life is better for both of us now. I married my boyfriend of 2 years and we moved from the States to Australia, where he's from, when I was 18, and he was 25. He'd always been controlling, but I didn't have any family or any real friends, so I was just happy not to be alone. I got pregnant after a year in Australia, and I was happy, but he told me I needed to have an abortion. Insisted on it. I'm not against abortion, but I didn't want one. He made the app for me and I went, but I never made the follow-up app for the procedure. He was pissed, and in the following weeks things turned physical. He pushed me, then he elbowed me in the stomach, and then he punched me in the stomach. He said that he didn't want a pregnant wife and that if I had the kid he would make sure every day of its life was a living hell. Then he told me he wasn't abusive, this was just an extreme case, because he wanted to end the pregnancy. I was terrified and pretty alone. My friends in Australia were his friends and his family were no help. His parents hated Americans, and consequentially me, and when I reached out to his sister she told me she didn't want to get involved, so at this point I'm alone. The money from my job is getting direct deposited into a joint account that he gives me an allowance from, and my passport is locked up in his gun safe. So in desperation I contact the American embassy from the phone at my work. They tell me they will put me up at a hotel, get me a temporary visa, and fly me back to any place in the US. I contact the only friend I could think of and tell her the situation. She is broke, from a small town, but offers to let me stay in her apartment as long as I need. Then I let the embassy know, and they tell me where to check in at my hotel, which they didn't book under my real name. This has all happened in one day, and they really want me out of my home life. The next day I leave for work, but I just walk down the street and hide in the woods. I wait until I know he is gone, and then I come back and pack what little I can handle. These are the scariest moments of my life, worried that he will come home. While I'm doing this then I walk to the bus stop. This is also terrifying as I don't want to be seen. Finally boarding the bus was a feeling like none other. I felt like I was free from him. So, after a few days, I get back to the US. I live with my friend, who 9 years later is now my best friend, and I have my baby, a girl. She turns 9 this summer, and has an adoptive father who came into her life when she was 5. She's very happy, and so are my husband and I. In a weird twist of fate, I developed an ovary disorder shortly after she was born, not related to the pregnancy, and am now infertile. So if I hadn't had her, I would never be a mom. The Australian guy still lives there, but I don't know what kind of fallout I caused. A few years ago I chanced to look at his Facebook page, and from what little I saw, he's still the same kinda guy, still going to the gun club, still working at the same place, still single. Anyway, that's my story. I don't regret it one bit. Dad had always emotionally and sometimes physically abused me. My mum always took his side, or he would hurt her. 2 Diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder at 13. Parents told me to stop going to therapy because you need to stop attention seeking and stop dwelling on the past. Was physically abused every day on the school bus, groped and touched by this guy. Parents did not believe me. The school tried to help, but did nothing. Self-harmed every day for years, and I was suicidal constantly. Not allowed to go back to therapy or get meds. I was so confused about my sexuality and my gender. Shortly after I was 18 I came out as transgender, female to male. My dad got drunk, woke me up at 3 AM, and told me I had to go somewhere with him, and began shouting. When I refused, he eventually left. I overdosed on antidepressants, pain meds, vodka and Listerine. I left my boyfriend a voicemail telling him goodbye and sorry. Next few hours are a blur. Pass out, but don't die. Wake up when the police arrive at my house. Dad plays innocent. Pretends I was attention seeking. As soon as the police are gone, my dad screams, "I'm going to kill you." He punches me in the head and strangles me until my mum pulls him off. Tells her he will kill her too if she won't let him kill me. Screaming at me how he is going to set the whole house on fire because this is the end for our family. Tells me he will lock me up and throw away the key. Tells me I disgusting. Tells me he wishes that my suicide attempts were a success. My mum does nothing. Whenever I react to the journal's things that he tells me, she tells me to shut up. After him telling me for hours about the multiple ways he wishes I would die and how he would kill me, I vomit on the floor and try to leave. My mum takes away my phone and medication. Nobody believed me when I told them what happened. I was called a liar. My college told me just get your work in on time. They would not help me. Too scared to tell the police. My boyfriend and I decide to move in together where he lives, 2 hours away from where I live. I move out. The day after I move out, they convert my room to an office. I quit school. Who told me they were disappointed because I had so much potential. Didn't care. Would rather be alive than dead. Had to get out. Panic attacks every day, and I dream about my dad attacking me and telling me he wishes I were dead. But I'm a little better. Recovering. I will be forever grateful of my boyfriend who supports me, and my best friend, who I only met a couple of days before my dad's attack. They kept me sane. Without them both, I would have gone through with it. Still suicidal. Still recovering. Not much of a happy ending to this story, but I'm getting there. I will make it.